Do you know what hurts a firefighter the most? It's not the flames, it's the moment he opens his eyes in the middle of the night and realizes that after 40 years standing on the line between life and death, the thing that burned his life down was his own family. I once ran into fires so big my mask turned scorching hot. Once pulled 3 people out of a fire line in the last 10 seconds. Yet when I came home, I was pushed into a 6-degree garage and treated like a freeloader on the very land I had built with my own sweat. If you ever thought family could never be that cruel, my story will make you question that belief. Because sometimes the person who wounds you the deepest is the one who shares your last name. And before you take this journey with me, I want to offer a simple but sincere thank you. Thank you for your time, for listening, and for believing that the truth deserves to be told all the way through. If you're reading this, leave a dot, or tell me which city you're listening from. It helps me know who this story reaches, and gives me one more reason to keep writing about justice, dignity, and the small flame that keeps burning in the hearts of those who were pushed into darkness. Now, let's begin where everything collapsed, the thin mattress in the garage beneath Grey Peak. At 69 years old, people say a man should be sleeping on a proper bed in a warm room with a window facing something kinder than a recycling bin. Yet that morning I opened my eyes on a thin mattress laid directly on the freezing concrete floor of my own garage, right under the snow-covered Grey Peak Range, and the first thing I saw was the blue lid of the recycling bin trembling in the early wind. My breath came out in white puffs. The thermometer hanging on the wooden post beside the roll-up door blinked the number 6 degrees Celsius. Fine for a few tools, but too cold for bones that had survived 40 fire seasons. My back throbbed from the concrete, my knees stiff like rusted hinges. When I turned, a sharp pain ran from my left shoulder down my arm, right where the fading yellow bruise from Brent Haverson's accidental shove still lingered. I lay still for a few seconds, listening to wind slipping through the door gap, a pickup engine starting on the dirt road, and then the sound of running water inside the house, probably Elise turning on the sink. A faint smell of coffee filtered through the tiny vent above, thin like a cruel joke. My whole life, I loved the smell of morning coffee, whether in the fire station or in my own kitchen. Now it felt like something deliberately kept out of reach. 2 weeks. I had slept in that garage for 2 full weeks. The mattress under me used to sit on the old living room sofa, where I took naps after long walks. Now it sat against the back wall, leaving just enough space to reach the stainless steel sink beside the old shelf, some repair tools in a cardboard box, holding a few firefighter items I hadn't been able to throw out. On the wall, among oil stains, my faded yellow turnout gear hung quietly. The Montana DNRC wildland fire patch, slightly crooked, but still sharp. I pushed myself upright. My joints cracked like a support beam under strain. The bruise on my shoulder reminded me of the moment Brent pressed me against the wall with his wide hand, his voice almost whispering, "Old man, you signed everything over to me. Don't make this harder." That day, I only shook my head, saying nothing. I still believed it was temporary, that Elise would come to her senses. That was the first mistake in a chain of mistakes. The clatter of pans inside the house grew louder. I looked through the small glass panel on the door connecting the garage and the kitchen. If I stood at just the right angle, I could see part of the dining table. Brent was sitting there, his back to me, the gray t-shirt hugging his shoulders and neck, like when he still worked out regularly. Elise sat across from him, hair tied hastily behind her head, hands wrapped around a coffee mug. Morning light streamed through the window above the sink, brushing a pale layer across my daughter's face. She didn't look toward the garage. She hadn't looked toward the garage for many days now. My stomach growled, a small sound even I felt ashamed of. Last night's dinner had been 3 crackers taken from the dry goods box. Water collected from the sink had a taste of metal and detergent, but it was better than nothing. I stood up, wrapped the thin blanket around my shoulders, and stepped to the door. My calloused hand rested on the knob. I didn't knock. This was my house. I simply turned it. The door swung open before my hand could lift. Brent nearly filled the doorway. He was tall, broad-shouldered, smelling of cheap cologne mixed with leftover bacon grease on his shirt. He looked down at me, his pale blue eyes smooth like a frozen lake. "I just need a cup of coffee," I said, my voice hoarse from the cold. "Just a little, Brent." He snapped his fingers. A sharp, dry click in the air. A smirk. "Hey, old-timer." He stretched the word like it was a joke. "Garage residents don't get kitchen privileges." "Just one cup," I repeated, because sometimes in a fire you have to repeat simple instructions for people in panic. But here, the one panicking wasn't me. "House rules." Brent folded his arms, blocking the entire doorway. "You know the rules." I looked past him. Elise kept her head down, pushing a piece of scrambled egg around her plate with a fork. "Brent's right, Dad," she said, her voice flat as winter asphalt. "Just go back to the garage." Not Daddy. Not Dad. Please, just Dad, like addressing someone on paperwork. The word dropped between us was heavier than the steel roll-up door behind me. Brent tilted his head, the smile on his mouth curling one notch higher. "Oh, and don't worry about the money, old-timer. This month's pension came in $6,800. He shrugged like he was mentioning loose change. "I'm handling everything. It's all good." The door closed. The lock clicked sharply. I stood there for a few seconds, my hand still on the knob, though there was nothing left to hold. The smell of coffee was cut off on the other side, leaving only cold air sliding through the floor gap. I took a long breath to remind my lungs they still worked. Then I went back to the mattress. The old flip phone lay on the concrete beside my pillow. The only piece of technology I kept after Brent helped me switch to a smartphone 3 months ago, and then quietly took it away to manage the bills. I picked it up. The tiny screen blinked with a bank alert. The system I had set up myself back when I was strong enough to make sure no one touched my accounts without me knowing. Withdrawal, $6,800. New balance, $12,942. I stared at the numbers until my eyes stung. 6,800. The entire pension for the month. And 12,942. What remained after a few months of Brent's managing. Before they moved in, that account had been enough to make sure I would never have to worry about a bill for as long as I breathed. My fingers tightened around the phone until I heard a faint crack somewhere in the plastic casing. In the garage, pale light slipped through the small window, facing the base of Gray Peak. Snow on the summit reflected a soft white glow, the same kind of light I had seen from a very different vantage point. Suddenly, I remembered the summer of 1999. The wildfire west of Helena was shifting 3 times in one afternoon. I stood on a slope in my yellow gear, soaked with sweat, mask pushed up on my forehead for a scarce 30 seconds of air that didn't taste like smoke. Below me, flames crawled through dry grass like a living beast, red and hungry, eating into the thin pines. "Garrick, pull half the crew to the right flank," the captain barked over the radio. "Wind's shifting." We didn't panic. We were never allowed to panic. I simply raised my hand, turned, and led the rookies along the rock edge, looking for a new approach. In this job, stepping back half a step wasn't running. It was finding a better angle to cut the fire before it crossed the tree line. That night, after 18 hours on the fire line, we brought the blaze under control. No bodies under silver blankets. I still had the commendation that hung in my living room, or used to hang in my old living room, where Brent now kept the big television he bought with my money. I looked again at the thin mattress, the sink with brown rust around the rim, the roll-up door to the front yard that I didn't have a key to open from the outside. Strange how a man who once stood in fire calculating wind and escape routes for an entire crew could be cornered into a place this small in his own house without realizing it. For 2 weeks, I had thought like someone trapped. I counted crackers, counted each time Brent laughed in the living room, counted each morning Elise walked past with coffee without looking toward the garage. I thought of myself as a victim, but staring at withdrawal 6,800 on that tiny screen, I felt something else move inside my chest. Not fear, not despair. It felt like embers under ash glowing again after a faint breath. I set the phone down slowly, then reached for the DFPC patch on the gear hanging on the wall. The fabric was cold under my fingers, but the stitching was steady. I closed my eyes and breathed in the smell of motor oil, old wood, metal, scents I understood better than any number on a bank statement. In a bad fire, the first step isn't to run. The first step is to look, accept the fire is there, then trace backward, where it started, how the wind is blowing, which trees are the weak point. I knew that process well. I had used it my whole life. Maybe it was time to use it on the thing burning my life down, and this time the fire carried the name Haverson. I opened my eyes, looked at the mattress, the flip phone, the locked door, then glanced at the white, bright gray peak outside the small window. I knew I would have to do something I had avoided for 2 weeks, trace every step, every day, every signature that brought me from my own living room into this garage. 6 months ago, Elise called and told me they just needed to stay for a few weeks, Dad. That was when the fire started, and if I wanted to put it out, I would have to go back to that exact moment. If there was ever a day in my life when I wished I could go back and hold my own hand still so it wouldn't touch a pen, it was that afternoon 6 months ago when I sat at the wooden table in my living room, across from my daughter and the man I mistakenly thought was family. That afternoon in Bozeman, the sky was ash gray, clouds drifting like thin smoke after a small fire. Clouds drifting like thin smoke after a small fire. I was sweeping leaves in the backyard when Elise called. Her voice was hoarse and trembling in a way that wasn't normal, the kind of tremble of someone who has held an unhappy secret too long. Dad, we got kicked out by the landlord. I stopped. A few dry leaves fell to the ground, the sound as soft as an old rope snapping. Kicked out? Why? Elise didn't explain clearly, only vague mentions of rent, of Brent being misunderstood. I heard her sigh on the other end, exactly like the sound she used to make as a child, after a nightmare before crawling into my arms. Dad, can we move back to Bozeman for a while? Just a few weeks. Brent will find work again soon. I didn't ask anything else. I couldn't. Losing a rental, losing a job. Those things hurt worse than any burn on my hands. She was my daughter. The only answer I could give was, come home. 2 days later, Brent's old Ford Fusion, packed full of belongings, stopped in front of the cabin. Elise got out first, her eyes tired but still the same hazelnut color. They were the day I held her in the Livingston Hospital for the first time. Brent got out after her, flashing a wide, forced smile, wrapping an arm around Elise's back as if to prove, we're fine. I carried their things upstairs. Elise hugged me longer than usual. But Brent was different. He walked into the house with the eyes of someone appraising everything. The sofa, the wooden cabinet, the framed photo of me and my late wife. Everything seemed to turn into numbers in his head. That night we ate chicken soup. Elise talked about their old place, about the landlord cutting the lease. Brent stayed quiet, but every time Elise mentioned money, his fingers tapped the table lightly as if keeping count. A week later, Brent started talking about helping. He called me to the dining table where afternoon light streamed through the window, casting long streaks across the wooden surface like scratches. Elise sat beside him, hands woven together on her lap, trying to smile, but worry flickered behind her eyes. Dad, Brent began in an overly friendly tone, the kind only people with intentions practice. I think you're handling too much, I chuckled. What do I have that's too much? Utility bills, property tax, pension comes in monthly. Exactly. Brent clapped once, hard enough that Elise flinched. That's why. You're getting older. You need us to share the load. You don't need to stress over paperwork anymore. He pulled a stack of neatly printed papers from his black briefcase, edges trimmed like they'd been cut with a precision knife. On the first page were bold letters, limited power of attorney, banking convenience only. I looked at the words limited and convenience and felt relieved. It sounded reasonable. I wasn't great with technology or online banking anyway. Kids these days seem to know more. Brent turned the page toward me, placed a pen on top, and slid it toward my side. You only need to sign 3 spots. All your pension will go into a joint account so I can pay your bills. For convenience. I frowned. Why convenience? I can still handle it. Dad, Elise stepped in, her voice soft like the breeze slipping through the pine trees behind the house. Brent knows this stuff. Just let us help. Brent tilted his head, pretending to be concerned. Actually, if we don't do the POA within 3 months, the bank might close your old account because of new policies. Better to do it now. I looked up. The bank might close it? Yeah. Brent nodded too quickly to be true. Happens all the time back in Billings. That was the first Opas shove. Not with his hand, but with the vague fear he planted in me. I looked at Elise. My daughter gave a strained smile and squeezed my hand gently. Sign it, Dad. It's fine. I skimmed the first page. Just tiny text, mostly standard banking clauses. Authorization to manage monthly disbursement. Convenience purposes only. Nothing alarming, but I didn't know that the second page, thin as a cheap photocopy sheet, contained a tiny footnote at the bottom. Supplemental clause. Temporary broad authority when needed. It sat on the lower edge in text so small you'd have to hold it inches from your face to read. And Brent never flipped to that part when he handed me the paperwork. If I had looked more carefully that day, if I hadn't trusted Elise's face, if I hadn't thought family doesn't hurt each other, maybe everything would have been different. But I signed. 3 signatures. 1 initial. The pen slid across the paper like a blade I didn't realize was cutting. Elise exhaled in relief. Brent tucked the papers back into his briefcase, his smile so wide I could see his molars glint under the light. All done, Dad, he said lightly, as if this was just a small formality. From now on, I'll handle everything. When he stood up, he patted my shoulder, the exact spot that became a bruise the next day, and said the sentence I now understand was the clicking sound of a trap snapping shut. You just need to sign 3 spots. The money comes to me to manage for convenience. But that convenience wasn't for me. It was for a man who was slowly changing the locks of my life, starting with a pen I trusted too much to pull back in time. And that was the moment the legal trap began to close. 3 weeks after the day I signed that POA, everything began to change color. And so fast that even someone who once stood in the middle of firestorms like me couldn't realize I was being slowly heated alive. It started with 1 small number, then a bigger number, then a number big enough to extinguish every last illusion of a father who still believed family couldn't hurt him. That morning I opened my old phone to check the bank alerts I had followed for many years. I expected to see the pension deposit, but instead, the screen showed 1 short line I had to read twice to believe. Available balance, $300. 300, from 12,942 down to 300. It didn't drop slowly like water leaking from a cracked tank. It vanished as if someone was pulling it out in fistfuls. Deliberately, rhythmically, strategically. I sat at the wooden table, opened the old notebook where I used to write my wildfire shifts, tried to calculate if I had forgotten any expenses. But there was nothing. No big bill. No unusual cost. Only that. My money was no longer in my place. I hadn't even asked Elise yet when Brent's car pulled in. I heard the engine first, then the door, then the footsteps. Fast, firm, heavy. The footsteps of a man who had just bought something expensive and couldn't wait to flaunt it. When I stepped onto the porch, Brent was standing beside a brand new truck. Not the cheap kind mechanics buy to get up the mountain. This was a Ford F-150 Tremor, the strongest off-road trim, thick tires, dark gray paint, doors opening without a single creak. I knew that truck. Back when I worked in the fire service, the station chief ordered one like it for equipment transport. The price then was almost $58,000. Brent slid his hand across the hood like petting a favored animal, then turned to me with a smile slick as fresh motor oil. "Nice, huh, Dad?" I didn't answer immediately. I just stared at the glossy paint reflecting my own shadow. An old man on the steps, looking smaller than the truck itself. "What did you buy it with?" I asked. "Oh," he laughed, raising the key like a trophy. "Our money?" "Our money?" "Family money, Dad." "No. Say it correctly. My money, your access." He said the word family as lightly as a breeze on a lake, but it hit my chest like a falling tree. "Brent," I said, trying to stay calm, "that was money I saved for old age. Why would you—" "You have an old age now," he shrugged. "I'm taking care of you." I calculated it. "This truck is perfect for family errands and safe when I take you to doctor checkups." Then he glanced me up and down with an intentional cruelty. "Especially with the way you walk these days. One slip and you'll break something." He pressed hard on the words, "doctor checkups," like someone pushing another man's head underwater. Before I could respond, he opened the door and turned the key. The engine purred like something ready to swallow anything in its path. Elise stepped out, the porch light brushing her face. She looked at the truck, then at me, then at Brent, and she said nothing. Not one word. That afternoon, Brent brought home a huge box, half the size of the kitchen table. He dropped it in the living room as if displaying a trophy. "Look, Dad," he said, tearing open the cardboard with almost violent excitement. Inside was a 75-inch OLED TV worth $2,900. The exact model Walmart commercials push during big holidays. "Picture's fantastic," Brent said, winking at Elise. "We should live properly." That phrase, "live properly," tightened something inside my chest. The white glow of the screen lit his face too cleanly. So clean, it made my skin crawl. On the dining table were whiskey bottles lying among paper bags, the kind that cost $180 to $260 a bottle, the kind the younger firefighters at my station used to only dream of. I don't drink whiskey, and if I did, it wouldn't be that kind. Elise saw me looking, embarrassed. "Dad, we bought them for guests." I asked, "Which guests?" She didn't answer. Brent didn't miss his chance for a second stab. "Guests who appreciate things, Dad. Not the kind who drink instant coffee and sleep next to a toolbox." 3 days later, I ran into Theo Hartwell, my neighbor, living in the next cabin about a 10-minute walk away. He was pure Montana, quiet, straightforward, and when he looked at something, he looked right through it. I was taking out the trash when Theo stepped over with a shovel on his shoulder and his old fur coat. He glanced at my driveway, where Brent was unloading 2 more brown boxes from the truck. "Nolan," Theo said, his voice low like stones rolling under stream water, "that boy spends money like lottery cash." I gave a faint laugh, not because anything was funny, but because I didn't know how to explain anything to a man who had seen me work for 30 years to save every dollar of firefighter pay. "Yeah," I said, "he's helping me." Theo stared at me for a few seconds, the look of someone who knows something is wrong but knows I'm not ready to say it. "Helping? To what extent?" "To the extent that I have $300 left." He fell silent. The wind from Gray Peak moved through the pines, bringing the smell of sap, a smell I associate with safety. But between us there was no safety, only the quiet before something worse. That night, I decided to confront Brent. I found him in the living room, adjusting the new TV, its brightness flooding the room. "Brent!" I called. He turned, wearing the relaxed smile of a man living too well on someone else's money. "Where is my money?" I asked plainly. You know, he said, raising the volume, family money. There is no such thing as family money here. My voice was low but sharp. I'll ask again, where is my money? His expression changed. It darkened, deep like the shadow under the woods before a wildfire jumps. He walked closer, too close. I could smell cheap whiskey on him. Then suddenly he shoved. A calculated shove, just strong enough to push me back 2 steps into the wooden cabinet, just light enough to leave no bruise, but powerful enough to stain me with humiliation from my chest to my neck. Elise stood in the kitchen, her hands trembling, but she didn't speak, didn't move toward me, didn't defend me. She stood like a shadow, caught between fear and blind loyalty. I stood upright again. No words, no need. Because in the moment Brent pushed me, I heard a different sound. Not wood, not the TV, but a tiny click in my head. The same sound a fire makes when it catches the edge of a dry branch. The sound that warns the big burn is coming. And I, a man who has faced hundreds of fires, knew one thing with absolute certainty. Some flames, if you don't extinguish them fast, will consume everything. And that was the moment I realized something. This was no longer a family issue. This was a coup, and I had just witnessed its first unmistakable signs. That night, I heard the sound of a spoon tapping the edge of a porcelain bowl from the dining room. Steady, light, but carrying exactly the kind of sound a firefighter can sense from afar, the sound of a decision already prepared. I stepped into the dining room, the place where we used to gather every Thanksgiving. Now, under the pale yellow light cold as an interrogation room, Elise sat still at the head of the table, while Brent leaned back in his chair, legs spread wide, swirling a glass of whiskey as if he were running a corporate meeting, and I was the lowest employee on the roster. "Nolan," Brent said without even looking at me, "sit down." I stayed standing. He shrugged, signaled to Elise, then finally lifted his face with a bored smile, like he had been waiting for this moment a long time. "New arrangement," he announced, voice flat like reading an order to seize farmland. "You take up too much space in the house, and 3 people in a house. I handle the money, so we need to reorganize." I didn't answer. A cold draft from the window brushed the back of my neck like a small warning. Brent continued. "The garage has a mattress, a sink, a mini toilet, enough for you to live. Neat, not in anyone's way." Then he narrowed his eyes, adding a jab he knew would hit the nerves straight on. "A wildland firefighter like you is used to it. You can sleep anywhere. If you could sleep through forest fires, a garage is nothing." I turned to Elise, hoping to find some reaction, some discomfort, something left of the girl I used to lift onto my shoulders to watch fireworks. But Elise didn't look at me. She stared at her fingers, twisting her thin wedding ring. "Dad!" Her voice trembled slightly, but what came next was sharper than a steel saw blade. "Brent can take care of me. You just need to behave." Behave. I had heard many commands in my firefighting life. Retreat. Shift the line. Hold the wind edge. But none ever cut into me like that word. Brent tapped the table lightly. "Good. Now move down to the garage. The sooner the better." He stood, walked to the sofa, and turned on the TV. The blue light washed over his face, twisting his smile into something that looked exactly like a man watching a trapped animal. I went to the bedroom and grabbed the mattress. The old one, its edges frayed. The one Martha used to say, "Keep it in the living room in case someone visits." I carried it across the living room. Brent glanced at me, didn't move, didn't help, only said one sentence that slapped the back of my neck like a handprint. "Don't let him scratch my hardwood floor." Elise didn't respond. The small okay in her throat died before it reached her lips. I opened the garage door. The cold rushed out, hitting my face like the night wind at the ridge of Gray Peak. That dry, biting cold, merciless. The single dim yellow bulb flickered. The smell of old engine oil mixed with damp concrete. A spider crawled along the wall. I set the mattress on the floor. It made a small thump, a sound so weak it made me feel equally weak. Nighttime temperatures in Bozeman then were 4 degrees Celsius. I had slept in ranger cabins without roofs, laid under pine trees during the Crow Creek firestorms. But that was when I was young, strong, and had a whole crew behind me. Now I was being exiled from the very house I built, by my daughter and the man I once mistook for family. I stood in the garage, breathing deep, looking around. The cracked tiles, the smell of grease, the long shadow of the tool cabinet. None of it looked too terrible. But the feeling was different. The feeling was like stepping into a fire shelter, that last resort foil cocoon, knowing your chance of survival is only 30%. I sat down, placed my hand on the cold mattress, and whispered inside myself, the first day of exile has begun. But somewhere deep inside, where the echo of burning forests still lived, there was a small red ember, about the size of a single coal. That ember wasn't out. It was waiting for oxygen, waiting for timing, waiting for revenge. For 3 consecutive nights in the garage, I couldn't sleep, not because of the cold, even though the 4 degrees Celsius concrete floor cut through the thin mattress like Brent's grimace every time he looked at me, but because my mind kept replaying everything that had happened. I was a wildland firefighter for 40 years. I had seen fire climb a mountainside in 8 minutes. I had seen smoke change color to signal a wind shift. I had seen a dry branch snap just because the heat column under the ground pushed upward. And I knew. Every disaster has small signs before it hits. The question was, which sign did I miss? On the garage floor, right beside the tool cabinet, was something I had stuffed there long ago. An old silver flip phone, the kind firefighters used because the battery lasted long. It was tough, and it didn't shatter when dropped in a canyon. I turned it on. The blue screen lit up like a fisheye in Hebgen Lake. No 4G signal, no internet, but one thing had survived. The SMS banking alert system I had set up years ago, back when I was still careful like when I logged wind lines. That was how I knew every withdrawal, every change in my account, even when Brent confiscated my smartphone. The row of messages appeared. Deposit, $6,800. Withdrawal, $6,800. Available balance, $12,942, $300. Each number was a small cut. Then the screen went black. No credit left. Of course, Brent had switched my smartphone into managing dad's, finances mode, and this flip phone was something he didn't bother with because he assumed it was useless. I tried calling anyway, even though I knew what was coming. The automated voice came on, cold as ice. You do not have enough credit to make this call. One simple sentence, but enough to tell me. I was completely isolated. But firefighters don't panic when trapped. They find exits. They find contact. I thought of Aiden Garrick, my son with my first wife, Allison. Aiden wasn't like Elise. He grew up in forests, around topo maps, around contour lines. Only people who truly love nature have the patience to study. He followed his mother's path, a GIS engineer with the Montana Conservation Corps, in Missoula, mapping fire behavior, forecasting wind direction, and designing fire breaks for conservation crews. Quiet work that saved people like me every season. Aiden was 37, lived in a cabin near Rattlesnake Creek, and every night he called me just to show me deer crossing his yard, or the first snow settling on his porch. The last thing he told me, "Dad, come live in Missoula with me. You're getting old, I can take care of you." But I said no, because I believed I was still strong, and because I believed Elise needed me. Now, standing in this garage, cold as a mountain hollow, I realized Aiden cared for me like a son should. Elise looked at me like a burden, and ironically, the person I wanted to call most was the one I couldn't reach, because the poor flip phone didn't have a single cent of credit. That night, I heard Brent talking in the kitchen, He thought I was asleep, or thought I wouldn't dare listen. The garage door was cracked open just enough for sound to slip through. "It's the day," Brent said, triumphant. "His pension hit my account this morning." Elise stayed silent for a moment, then asked, small like she feared her own words, Is that legal?" Brent laughed. "Of course it's legal. He signed the POA. Pension goes into my account, totally legal." He pressed the word "my" like he was stepping on someone's throat. Elise didn't answer, only the sound of a spoon stirring a cup, the trembling stir of someone who knows they're on the wrong side but can't step over. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to rein in the heat rising in my chest, a heat more vicious than the Granite Springs heat column back in 1999. That night, I sat on the edge of the garage mattress, the shaky yellow bulb above me flickering like a firefighter's dying headlamp. A thought appeared, small, but with fangs. Brent gave me exactly 10 minutes a day to use the restroom inside the house. 10 minutes. He treated me like a prisoner. But those 10 minutes were a crack, and fire always finds a crack to spread. I began observing. Brent walked every afternoon after 4. Elise showered every night at 9. The living room had no cameras. The kitchen window could see the garage corner. The hallway to the restroom was dark. Brent drank 2 glasses of whiskey every night. After 30 minutes, he was always careless. I watched everything. Because to survive, a firefighter must read the fire before it blows up. And the moment Brent slammed his hand on the table and said, "The pension is mine," I understood I was no longer in a house. I was in a wildfire with the arsonist in the next room. I set the flip phone down, clenched my hand, and made a decision. I would get out of that garage in the exact 10 minutes he allowed. Not to run, but to start fighting back. A firefighter doesn't run from the fire. He encircles it. The afternoon wind from the Gray Peak Ridge blew down harder than usual, cold, sharp, carrying the smell of dry pine and a hint of snow. I was sitting on the thin mattress in the garage, trying to steady my breathing to hear what Brent and Elise were doing inside the house, when an engine sounded in the driveway. It wasn't Brent's Ford Tremor. It wasn't neighbor Theo Hartwell's SUV. This one was so familiar. My heart jerked. The engine of a Honda Pilot, the sound I had heard for 10 years while Aiden drove it across Montana. The garage door swung open before I could stand. A white beam cut through the dim yellow light, and Aiden stood there, tall, solid, his face without a single smile. My son, the one whose Christmas invitation I refused last year, the one I thought I wouldn't see for a long time. Christ? Dad? Why are you here? Why are you sleeping in a place like this? I had no answer. The thin mattress, the old blanket, the concrete floor was bleeding cold through my skin. All of it answered for me. Aiden stared for one more second, and then his whole face changed, from pain to something else, something I had seen in him at 19 when a drunk shoved his stepmother in a parking lot, the pure anger of someone protecting family. His shoulders tightened, his fists clenched until his knuckles turned white. Half a breath more, and he would have charged straight into the house. I knew that look, the look of a son ready to break the jaw of anyone who touched his father. I grabbed his wrist before he could take a step. Aiden, stop. Those 3 words were barely enough to hold him. He turned to me, voice low, shaking from restraint. Dad, let me take care of that bastard, I swear. Just one hit. I shook my head. No, that's exactly what he wants. Aiden frowned. I pulled him closer, speaking very quietly, but with each word clipped, the way you teach someone how to survive a level 4 wildfire. He set me up. He wants a reason to call the cops, to say there's violence in the house. One punch from you ruins everything. Aiden held his breath, his heartbeat strong enough to make his jacket collar tremble. But he's treating you like this. His voice cracked. I can't stand it. I put a hand on his shoulder, the same shoulder that helped me rebuild the fence after the 2018 storm. Aiden, I don't need your fists. I looked straight into his eyes. I need evidence. Aiden went silent. The silence of someone who understood this battle required brains over strength, law over rage. Then he nodded once, sharp, firm, enough for me to know he had shifted into the right combat mode. All right, Aiden said, voice steady again. Then we get the evidence first, and then take both of them down at once. Aiden stepped inside, his eyes sweeping the space like he was reading fire terrain on a GIS map. Then his expression hardened, jaw tightening. Where's Brent? The house door answered before I could. Brent appeared, hands in pockets, wearing the smirk of a man who thought he held the reins in someone else's home. Aiden, visiting the family garage? Aiden didn't answer. He removed the steel blue Psycho Prospects from his wrist, worth about $600, and set it on the wooden table in the garage. The sharp click, like snapping off a safety lock. If you need money so badly you make my father sleep in a garage, Aiden said, voice low but sharp like ridge wind on the Bitterroot, then take this and get the hell out of this house right now. Brent laughed, the kind of laugh that stank of contempt. Ha! I get $6,800 every month. What am I going to do with $600? He bent down, looked at the watch like a cheap toy. Do I look like the kind of guy who picks up spare change? Aiden stood still, unmoving. Then, very subtly, he slipped his hand into his jacket pocket. I knew that motion. Aiden was turning on the recorder. Montana is a one-party consent state. Only one person needs to agree for it to be legal. Brent didn't know. He sprawled back in the folding chair, legs wide, acting like he had already won. Let me tell you something, Brent went on, sounding more confident and more stupid with every word. The pension goes into my account every month. Legal. The old man signed the paper. I run this house. I set the rules. And if the old man wants to live here, he follows my rules. I saw Aiden's throat twitch, the only sign he was holding himself back. Brent still didn't realize he was hanging himself with his own mouth. And I'll tell you something else, he said, leaning forward, getting right in Aiden's face. I'm filing paperwork to have the court declare him incompetent. Then this house, this pension, all of it will be mine. The air in the garage thickened. I had stood inside cabins surrounded by flames, but I had never struggled to breathe the way I did then. Aiden stepped back half a foot, just enough to look Brent dead in the eye. Then, in a silence dry as early winter, he tapped his finger, ending the recording. Brent had confessed, clearly, word for word, intent for intent, unarguable, irreversible. Aiden looked at me. His eyes didn't smile, didn't gloat. They held the calm of someone who had just found the escape line. Through a fire, eyes that said the rest without speaking. Dad, I'm here, and I won't let them burn your life for one more second. The next morning, Aiden drove me in his Honda Pilot down the fog-covered road leading into downtown Bozeman. The 2-story red brick buildings, the roofs still holding patches of unmelted snow, and the small sign at the end of the street appeared, Bozeman Legal Aid Center, Elder Protection Division. Aiden walked fast, as if afraid that if he slowed even a second, I would be dragged back into that 4°C garage. Inside the center, we met attorney Meredith Skye, a woman around 35, hair tied back, brown eyes sharp, but her voice low and steady, like someone used to facing people who dump their burdens onto the elderly. Mr. Nolan, she said as she shook my hand, I saw the message Aiden sent. I need to hear the entire timeline from start to finish. I told her. Every piece, every detail. From the POA, Brent forced me to sign using the limited authority trick, but hiding an expanded clause on a secondary page, to being expelled from my own home, being restricted to 10 minutes of restroom use a day, and having my pension fully diverted. Aiden sat beside me, writing down every word, pausing only to ask for dates, times, or a clearer description of the bruise on my shoulder. When I finished, Meredith leaned back, clasped her hands, and said very clearly, "This POA is not valid. It was signed under manipulation and vague intimidation. Under Montana law, this is considered coercion, which means it is voidable. It can be nullified immediately with evidence." I exhaled hard, but Meredith wasn't done. "And did you know this?" She opened her laptop and pulled up a statute. Montana Code 455213, elder financial abuse, taking property from someone over 60 through deception or pressure. That is a felony, a criminal offense. Brent didn't just break morality. He broke state criminal law. Aiden's grip tightened so hard that the pen in his hand gave a small crack. Meredith continued, her voice now sharp as an axe cutting into pine bark. "To proceed correctly and with full force, we need a complete plan." She listed each step on the whiteboard like mapping a fire containment line. 1. Medical exam. Document all injuries with a physician's signature. 2. Photos. Full documentation of the garage, the sleeping area, the concrete floor, and the bruises. 3. APS report. File with Adult Protective Services to establish the violation record. 4. Emergency protective order. Request an immediate protective order, removing Brent from finances and from Mr. Nolan. 5. Freeze accounts. Halt all financial access before he drains another dime. Aiden turned to me, his eyes bright, not with hope, but with the fire of finally finding the fuel to fight this blaze. Meredith held out her hand. "Let me hear the recording you two mentioned." Aiden took out his phone and played the clip of Brent in the garage last night. Brent's voice came through so clearly I could see his smug grin all over again. "When I get him declared incompetent, the house is mine." Meredith raised her eyebrows, leaned back in her chair, and exhaled slowly, as if she had just heard the strongest piece of evidence in a month. Then she said, concise and cold enough to raise the hair on my arms, "This alone can bury him." The next morning, Aiden drove me to Gallatin Valley Clinic, where the Bridger Range reflected on the glass windows like a reminder of the years I spent standing inside wind and fire. Inside the clinic, the cold white LED lights made everything so clear that nothing could be hidden. Dr. Callie Mercer, an internal medicine physician around 40, small in build but with eyes sharp like someone used to seeing cases of neglect no one dares to name, stepped into the room, put on gloves, and began examining me. She asked me to step onto the scale, wrote the number down, then checked my waist, muscle mass, and hydration level. While Aiden sat in the corner with a notes app open, Dr. Mercer looked at the results and frowned. "You lost 9 kilos in 6 weeks. For an older adult, that level of weight loss cannot be considered natural." I swallowed, humiliation and cold hitting at the same time. Dr. Mercer examined the bruise on my left shoulder. She rotated my arm gently, then used a blue spectrum examination light to check the spread of subdermal blood. "This bruise," she said slowly, "is not from a light fall. It has a force angle. This is the type caused by a forceful shove." Aiden's hand clenched until his knuckles turned white, but he said nothing. Dr. Mercer continued the exam. Pulse, blood pressure, skin moisture, and eye condition. Then she sighed. "You're dehydrated and showing signs of mild malnutrition. Not an immediate danger level, but for someone over 60, it is a red warning." While Dr. Mercer filled out the medical chart, Aiden held out his phone. "Doctor, we photographed the garage." On the screen were the images Aiden had taken using the specialized camera from his friend in the GIS team. Cracked concrete floor, flickering yellow bulb, a thin mattress placed right by the door, a sink with reddish-brown rust streaks, and a thermometer reading exactly 6 degrees Celsius at 3:30 in the morning. Dr. Mercer looked at the pictures for a long moment. She wasn't looking at the photos. She was looking at me. "How long have you lived in these conditions?" 2 weeks. My answer made the air freeze like early winter frost on window glass. Dr. Mercer set her pen down. I need to say this very clearly, so both of you understand the legal implications. What you are experiencing is not just poor living conditions, it is what medicine classifies as a hazardous environment for an older adult. Aiden looked up immediately. She continued, and one more thing. She opened the copy of the POA Aiden brought. The POA Brent forced Mr. Nolan to sign. It does not give him authority to coerce hospitalization or place someone in a psychiatric ward. It only allows him to sign a request for psychiatric evaluation. But even if he signs it, the hospital still requires an independent physician's diagnosis before keeping a patient. She emphasized each word like mapping out a tactical diagram, meaning he does not have the authority to lock you in a ward, not legally, not by statute, not permitted. I felt as if someone had just pulled me out of a frozen lake. For weeks, I believed Brent had legal authority over medical decisions and believed he could sign any form to push me into a place where I had no say. But Dr. Mercer looked straight at me, her voice firm and leaving no space for doubt. Mr. Garrick, what you're living in qualifies as hazardous conditions for a senior. That sentence was not just a diagnosis. It was the final blow, turning my humiliation into legal evidence, the missing piece of a case that would burn down the entire plan of Brent Haverson. That afternoon, when the Bozeman's son had just slipped behind the Madison Range, the silver Subaru Forester belonging to APS, Adult Protective Services, stopped right in front of the driveway. On the car door was a pale blue logo, Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services. The person who stepped out was Teresa McAllister, around her mid-50s, solid build, the face of someone who has seen far too many cases where children treat their parents like burdens. Brent saw her from the kitchen door, and I swear in the first half-second his face twitched. The exact kind of twitch from someone who knows he has tightened the rope too far. But then he switched immediately into performance mode, flung the door wide, smiled brightly, voice sweet like fake honey. Welcome, you must be here to check on my father-in-law's condition, right? Teresa stepped in. Her eyes swept the room, the new sofa, the 75-inch TV, the expensive whiskey on the shelf. Everything so spotless you could smell it had just been cleaned to hide something. Brent played the role of perfect son-in-law. I take care of him in every way. He's just a bit stubborn about living arrangements. We're trying to help. I stood behind Aiden, silent. We let Brent finish his act. Because the more he talked, the deeper he dug his own hole. Teresa looked at him, wrote a few lines, then asked, "Where does Mr. Nolan sleep?" Brent smiled. "The garage. But it's comfortable. There's a mattress, a sink, heating." Aiden held back a laugh. I didn't look at Brent anymore. I looked at Teresa, and I saw her eyes shift the moment she heard the word heating. She opened her notebook. "I want to see Mr. Nolan's sleeping area." Brent led the way, but before he opened the garage door, my neighbor, Theo Hartwell, stepped over from his yard. He wore a cap, still holding a hoe because he had been gardening. "I heard a strange car," Theo said. "If it's APS, I have something to submit." Brent spun around. "This is family business. You have no—" Teresa raised her hand. "Anyone with relevant information is allowed to provide it." Brent choked on his words, and from that moment, the front yard was no longer a yard. It became an evidence review table. Aiden opened his phone and showed the photos. The 6 degrees Celsius garage, the thin mattress, the rust-stained sink, the leaking pipe, the cracked concrete floor. Then he opened the temperature reading video, taken with the specialized GIS equipment. Then he played the audio recording from the previous night. "When I get him declared incompetent, the house is mine." Teresa listened, no expression, just a small nod. Then Theo Hartwell gave his statement. He saw Brent carrying boxes into the house, heard him brag that Money is as easy as winning the lottery, and saw Nolan pushed into a wall on a cold night. Then came my turn. Timeline, bank records, SMS banking alerts, and the photocopy of the trapped POA. Teresa wrote so fast I couldn't follow, but there was one more unexpected thing. She looked at Elise, who was standing at the porch edge, eyes red, twisting her wedding ring. "Ms. Elise," Teresa said, "since I walked in, you haven't said a single sentence to defend anyone." Elise stammered. I just... How long have you been gaslit?" Elise jerked. Brent jumped in instantly. "Don't say nonsense. She's my wife. I'm speaking to her." Teresa's voice was so cold that everything stopped moving. Elise lowered her head. Teresa wrote another line. Secondary victim. Psychological coercion. Brent began panicking. His voice changed. "Hey, what did I do wrong? I take care of this old man. I give him a place to stay. I feed him. Teresa closed her folder. Not hurried, not loud. But her next sentence hit him like a slap. "What you've done is elder abuse. You should prepare for a legal response." Brent froze, his face drained of color, like someone watching fire blow back against the wind. The most dangerous thing a firefighter can face. I looked at him. Aiden stood beside me, still gripping the phone with the recording. Brent couldn't say another word. Elise dropped onto the porch step, both hands on her head. Teresa snapped her file shut, fastened the clasp, and said the final sentence before leaving the yard. "From this point forward, Mr. Nolan is no longer alone." On Monday morning, the Bozeman sky was lead gray, clouds dropping low over the Bridger Ridge as if ready to release early snow. Gallatin County Courthouse appeared with its cold granite face, tall glass doors reflecting the heavy sky above. I walked slowly while Aiden walked fast as if trying to shield me from the wind. Meredith Skye was already waiting, gray coat, leather case in hand, her face completely without emotion, the exact kind of lawyer who only shows up when she already holds the winning hand. Courtroom number 3 opened. Judge Harlan Voss, a silver-haired tall man with eyes like blades cutting through every lie, stepped onto the bench. Court is now in session. Brent and Elise were already seated at the opposite table. Elise was visibly shaking. Brent wore a smug smile, but I saw the corner of his eye twitch in tiny pulses, the sign of a man who knows he is losing control. The hearing began. Meredith stood, presenting with a voice that was clear, cold, and without a single excess emotion. "Your Honor, this is a case of elder financial abuse under Montana Code 45-5-213. Evidence includes the medical report, photographic documentation of the living conditions, a garage at 6 degrees Celsius, the audio recording of the confession, and unauthorized expenditures totaling $19,200 over 3 months. She placed each document onto the evidence table, the sound of paper hitting wood like nails sealing a coffin. The screen lit up. Photos of the garage, the thin mattress, condensation on the wooden wall, the rusted sink, the thermometer showing 6 degrees Celsius. A sharp gasp echoed in the gallery. Then came Dr. Callie Mercer's medical report. 9 kilograms lost, a forceful shove bruise on the shoulder, dehydration, malnutrition, every detail thrown out mercilessly. Judge Voss frowned, eyes lowering onto the line, reading hazardous conditions for a senior. Brent began twisting in his seat like someone being interrogated under a spotlight. "Next is financials," Meredith said. "A Ford F-150 Tremor, valued at $58,000. A 75-inch OLED TV, whiskey ranging from $180 to $260 per bottle. Total spending over 3 months exceeding $19,200, all drawn from Mr. Nolan Garrick's pension account, redirected through a booby-trapped POA." The gallery erupted in murmurs. A brown-haired woman inhaled sharply. How could he treat an old firefighter like that? A man behind her whispered, He used to be a wildland firefighter. Those people save both forests and lives. The sound rippled like waves. Public humiliation is not laughter. It is dozens of eyes looking at Brent as if he were some kind of parasite. Judge Voss turned to Brent. Mr. Haverson, response? Brent stood, voice trembling but trying to appear calm. Your Honor, he chose to sleep in the garage. I only managed finances because he is elderly. The POA was legal, and the things I bought were for the family. Meredith immediately played the audio. When I get him declared incompetent, the house is mine. Brent's face went pale. Judge Voss tapped his gavel lightly. Do you have an explanation for this statement? Brent stuttered. That was said in anger, not literal. Then how about the phrase, pension is mine now, in the second recording? Judge Voss pressed, without a hint of mercy. The gallery gasped. Elise covered her face with her hands. Brent had no argument left. No further questions, Meredith said, returning to her seat, like someone who knows the battle is already over. Judge Voss straightened, his voice strong and sharp like cutting steel. The court has reviewed all evidence. I will issue the ruling. The entire room froze. First, the power of attorney is declared void due to coercion and misrepresentation. Brent staggered, mouth open in shock. Second, all signing authority of Brent Haverson on any accounts related to Mr. Nolan Garrick is hereby frozen, effective immediately. Third, restitution. Mr. Brent Haverson must repay $21,900 within 90 days. A faint, "Oh my God," rose from the gallery. Fourth, Mr. Brent Haverson and Ms. Elise Haverson must vacate Mr. Nolan Garrick's home within 48 hours. Elise burst into tears. Brent reached to hold her hand, but she pulled away as if touching hot metal. Fifth, a no-contact order. Both individuals are prohibited from approaching Mr. Garrick within 600 feet. Judge Voss stared directly at Brent. And finally, this case file is referred to the District Attorney's Office for potential felony elder financial abuse prosecution. The gavel struck. Court is adjourned. Brent collapsed into his seat. A woman in the gallery shook her head. Disgusting. A man whispered, Steal a firefighter's pension? He's finished. Aiden placed his hand on my shoulder, gentle but firm. Dad, it's done. We won. I stood there beneath the cold white lights of the courtroom, feeling my heartbeat return to its proper rhythm after months of being crushed. Justice, this time, stood with me. At noon on the second day after the trial, the Montana sky was so clear that even from a distance you could see the snow lines on the peak of Gray Peak reflecting sunlight. The dirt slope leading up to my cabin puffed fine dust under each tire. At 11:47 a.m., the heavy yellow U-Haul rolled out of the garage, Brent driving, Elise sitting beside him. Both stared forward, not daring to look back, as if just meeting my eyes would make them hear the cold hook of the law tightening around their necks. I stood on the steps of the porch, Aiden beside me, arms crossed, face hard as granite. When the U-Haul turned down the main road and disappeared behind the pines, I didn't feel joy, just a bitter kind of weightlessness. The house had never betrayed me. Only the people inside it had. A whistle sounded from the fence line. Old man Theo Hartwell leaned on his hoe and walked over. Well done, Nolan. Justice actually works up here. Then 2 more houses came over. Mrs. Margot brought a warm huckleberry pie. Everett shook my hand firmly, eyes shining with sympathy. They didn't say much. Montanans rarely do. But their eyes said everything. You didn't deserve that. Aiden thanked each of them while I only nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Minutes later, the van from Gallatin Locksmith Services pulled in. A young man with brown hair and a toolbox stepped out. All new locks, high-grade deadbolts, front door, back door, basement, garage. No one can use the old keys anymore. He installed each lock with sharp, decisive movements, the metallic clicks sounding like he was cutting the last rope tying me to Brent. After that, Aiden helped me set up security cameras around the cabin, one facing the slope, one on the porch, one pointed straight at the garage, the place that had been my prison for 2 weeks. Each camera connected directly to my phone and Aiden's. "If Brent is stupid enough to come back, you'll know instantly," Aiden said, voice steady but with a small ember of anger still burning in his eyes. When we stepped inside the cabin, it was brighter, cleaner, but still carried echoes of Elise, a faint scent of her perfume in the living room, a scarf forgotten behind a chair, a few fake nails under the table. I gathered them into a trash bag. Aiden looked at me and asked softly, "You okay, Dad?" I nodded, slow but solid. "Okay." It was the first time in months I said that word and meant it. In the afternoon, I went to the bank in downtown Bozeman to activate my new account. When the teller finished, she turned the screen toward me. The line, "Pension deposit received, $6,800, appeared clearly, not redirected, untouched by anyone. I sat still for a long moment. The teller leaned down gently. "Do you need anything else, Mr. Garrick?" I just smiled. "No, I just needed this." Back at the cabin, I opened the bedroom door. The late afternoon sunlight spread over the lodgepole pine walls like honey. I walked to the corner where an old wooden peg hung. From a box, I took out my wildland firefighter uniform, the faded Nomex shirt and pants still carrying the smoke of the 1999 Helena National Forest Fire. I straightened the collar, smoothed the worn fabric, and hung it on the wall exactly where my wife used to hang it whenever I returned from a long fire season. Aiden stood behind me, silent, giving me my moment, and I said, not for anyone else to hear, but for myself, "I fought fire for 40 years. I looked toward the garage, the place where I had slept like a beggar, was just another fire. No flame is big enough to burn down a firefighter who has stood on the red line of Montana's mountains for 4 decades. And today, I was no longer burning. I was standing inside my own home, breathing freely, a survivor, and the one who won. 1 year after Brent was taken out of my house in that yellow U-Haul, Montana changed. Or maybe I changed. Autumn at the foot of Gray Peak came earlier this year, cold wind carrying the scent of fresh pine resin, the sound of wind cutting through lodgepole pines, like the breathing of a forest being reborn. The Garrick Wildland Scholarship Fund, the fund I created from 10% of my pension each month, was officially operating. Not a charity to show off. It was a fund to help young firefighters, 20-year-old, 21-year-old kids with eyes still full of the fire of youth, attend the wildfire safety and survival course in Missoula, the class I once had to scrape together every dollar to join. Aiden designed the website for the fund, while I, nearly 70, drove my pickup down to the training camp every weekend, stood beside the recruits, corrected their pack posture, adjusted their straps, and taught them how to hear wind direction through the vibration of the treetops. They called me Old Man G, joking around, but every one of them listened to every word I said, because they knew I had stood on a real fire line, not in a textbook. My cabin had changed too. New windows, repaired roof, chimney cleaned. I planted 2 pine trees at the edge of the slope. One for Martha, my late wife, one for the firefighters who fell in the blazes I survived. Every morning I watered them and watched them grow a little more, and every morning I knew I was still alive, in the truest sense. An envelope was left under my window last week. The handwriting was so familiar, my chest tightened. Elise. The letter was 1 page long. She wrote that she had cooperated with the prosecutor, so she received probation instead of a conviction. Said Brent had been sentenced to 2 to 4 years for the felony of elder exploitation. Said that every night she lost sleep remembering me lying in that garage. Said she knew she owed me an apology she might never repay in a lifetime. I read the letter once, said nothing, did not reply. But I kept it, not out of forgiveness, but because I believe someone who is truly remorseful needs a chance to prove it with time, not with tears. As for Brent, he sent no letter, but I didn't need one. Justice answered him for me with bars, gray walls, and a roll call schedule twice a day. Tonight, Montana is colder than usual. Fresh snow lies in a thin layer on the cabin porch. I light a fire in the wood stove. The flame flickered gold and orange, casting my shadow across the wooden walls. Aiden sat in the chair across from me, adjusting a GIS map for next week's training. I stood and added another log to the stove. The fire threw warm light over my calloused hands. The hands that once dragged hoses, carried victims out of burn zones, and were the same hands that pulled me out of the spiral of betrayal by family. I looked at the fire and the words came to me, not to boast, but as a final reminder, a marker closing the chapter of a life betrayed. Justice is not a siren. It is the campfire flame that still burns when night falls. Warm, real, and not for traitors. I stood there, in the glow of the wood stove, looking out into the dark forest below Gray Peak, and realized something that took nearly 70 years of life to fully understand. Not all wounds come from fire, and not all salvation needs a siren. Some fires are started by the very people we love most. But when you survive them, you understand the true value of the life that remains. If you followed me from the 6th-degree garage to the firelit cabin doorway tonight, I want to offer you my deepest thanks. Thank you for staying, for listening to this story to the end, and for believing that justice, even slow, always finds its own way to the right person. If this story touched you, leave a dot or tell me which city you're listening from. It means more than you think. And if you believe truth always has a voice, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. Because somewhere out there, there are fathers, mothers, grandfathers, standing in the dark, waiting for a spark to begin their way back into their own lives. I am Nolan Garrick, and this is how I took back my home, my freedom, and myself.